Something strange is happening in the economy. Millions of people are working. They have jobs, they earn salaries, they follow the rules they were told to follow, get an education, build a career, work hard, save money. But despite doing everything right, more and more people feel like they're barely staying afloat. Rent keeps rising. Homes feel impossible to afford. Groceries cost more every year, and the future feels less stable than it used to. For decades, there was a group of people that held modern societies together. Not the ultra-rich, not the poor, the middle class, people who could afford a home, raise a family, take vacations sometimes, and slowly build a better life. But in 2026, that group is quietly shrinking. Not collapsing overnight, not disappearing dramatically, just slowly slipping away. And the strange part is, almost nobody is talking about it. For most of the 20th century, the middle class represented a promise. If you worked hard and stayed consistent, life would gradually improve. You might not become extremely wealthy, but you would be comfortable. A stable job could support a family. One income could sometimes buy a house. College was expensive, but still manageable. Healthcare costs were lower, and retirement felt realistic. The system wasn't perfect, but it felt predictable. Each generation expected their lives to be a little better than the one before. That expectation became part of the social contract. Work hard, play by the rules, and the system will reward you with stability. For decades, that idea shaped how millions of people plan their lives. But over the last 20 years, that contract has quietly begun to change. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, almost invisibly. First, housing prices began rising faster than incomes. Then, education costs climbed. Healthcare expenses increased. Meanwhile, salaries grew, but much more slowly. At first, the gap didn't look alarming, but year after year, that gap kept widening. The cost of living moved up faster than the ability to keep up, and many families adjusted the only way they could. They borrowed more. Credit cards, car loans, student debt, mortgages stretched over longer periods. Life continued to look normal on the outside, but underneath, financial pressure was quietly building. Because when stability becomes harder to afford, the middle class doesn't disappear instantly. It slowly becomes more fragile. For many families, the biggest change hasn't been income, it's been expenses. The cost of simply existing has been climbing for years. Rent, groceries, utilities, insurance, healthcare, education, each one rising a little at a time. Individually, the increases don't seem shocking, but together, they create a quiet pressure that slowly squeezes the middle class. A grocery bill that used to be $120 becomes $180. A rent payment that used to be $900 becomes $1,700. A monthly insurance bill quietly doubles, and salaries rarely rise at the same speed. So families adjust, they cut small luxuries, they delay purchases, they work extra hours. But the feeling remains that life is getting more expensive, faster than progress is happening. This is what economists call a cost of living spiral, and it's one of the biggest reasons the middle class is under pressure today. If there is one symbol of middle-class stability, it has always been homeownership. Owning a home meant security, it meant roots, it meant building long-term wealth. For generations, buying a house was considered a normal life milestone. But in many parts of the world today, that milestone feels further away than ever. Home prices have risen dramatically. In many cities, they have grown 2 or 3 times faster than incomes. Down payments have become massive. Mortgage payments stretch budgets to their limits, and interest rates make everything heavier. So younger generations delay buying homes. Some rent for much longer than their parents did. Others give up entirely because the numbers simply don't work. When the middle class can no longer afford homes easily, something fundamental changes. The traditional path to stability begins to break. Education was once seen as the safest path into the middle class. Study hard, get a degree, find a good job, build a stable future. For decades, this formula worked reasonably well, but the cost of education has changed dramatically. Tuition has climbed far faster than wages. Student loans have become normal. In some countries, entire generations begin adult life already carrying debt that can take years, sometimes decades, to repay. And while degrees still open doors, they no longer guarantee the financial stability they once did. Many graduates enter the workforce with high expectations, large loan payments, and a job market that looks very different than it did 20 years ago. Education still matters, but the financial risk attached to it has grown, and that risk places even more pressure on the middle class. At first glance, it may seem like wages have increased, and technically, they have. Many salaries today are higher than they were 20 or 30 years ago. But the real question isn't whether wages increased. The real question is, did they increase enough? Because when economists adjust wages for inflation, a different picture appears. The cost of housing rose faster, healthcare rose faster, education rose faster, even everyday essentials rose faster, which means that although paychecks are bigger on paper, their purchasing power hasn't grown nearly as much. In some cases, it has barely moved at all. So people work just as hard as previous generations, sometimes even harder, yet feel like they are running in place. The numbers may say progress, but everyday life often tells a different story. A few decades ago, many middle-class families relied on one primary income. One stable job could support a household, not luxuriously, but comfortably enough. Today, that model has changed dramatically. In many countries, two full incomes have become the norm, both adults working full-time, not necessarily to build wealth, but simply to maintain stability. Housing requires it, childcare requires it, healthcare requires it, living costs require it. And yet, even with two incomes, many families still feel stretched because the system quietly adjusted to expect that second paycheck. Prices rose, housing markets adapted, expenses expanded. So what once required one income now often requires two, which means that the margin of safety becomes smaller. If one income disappears, the entire financial structure can quickly become unstable. To maintain a middle-class lifestyle, many households rely on something increasingly powerful: debt. Credit cards fill temporary gaps. Car loans spread large purchases across years. Student loans extend decades into the future. Mortgages stretch budgets to their limits. Debt isn't always irresponsible. In many cases, it's the only way people can access opportunities: education, housing, transportation. But when debt becomes a necessity rather than a tool, it changes how financial stability works. Because stability built on borrowed money is more fragile. Payments become permanent, flexibility disappears, and financial stress grows quietly in the background. From the outside, life may still look comfortable, but underneath, many middle-class households are balancing carefully, trying to keep everything moving, trying to stay one step ahead of the bills. For many younger adults today, the traditional path to the middle class feels harder than ever. Previous generations often followed a familiar sequence: finish school, start a career, buy a home, build stability over time. But for many people entering adulthood today, that sequence feels increasingly out of reach. Housing costs require larger down payments, student debt delays saving, entry-level salaries struggle to keep pace with living costs, and major life milestones begin to move further into the future. People delay buying homes, delay starting families, delay financial independence. It's not necessarily because they want to wait. It's because the numbers simply don't work the way they used to, which creates a feeling that many young professionals quietly share. Not that they're unwilling to work hard, but that the ladder they were told to climb has moved higher. While the middle class feels increasing pressure, another trend has been unfolding at the same time. The gap between the wealthy and everyone else has widened. Over the last few decades, assets such as real estate, stocks, and investments have grown rapidly. People who already owned these assets often saw their wealth increase significantly. But those without them, especially younger generations, found it harder to enter those markets. Buying property requires large capital. Investing requires spare income. And when most of your earnings go toward basic expenses, building wealth becomes slower. This doesn't mean opportunity disappeared, but it does mean the starting line looks very different for different groups. And when the gap grows wider, the middle class begins to feel squeezed between two realities: the cost of living on one side and rising wealth on the other. When people say life feels harder financially today, they're often describing something deeper than individual problems. They're describing structural pressure, costs rising faster than incomes, essential services becoming more expensive, long-term stability requiring more resources. In the past, small financial mistakes were often survivable. Today, the margin for error feels thinner. One unexpected bill, one period of unemployment, one health emergency, and years of financial progress can quickly disappear. That fragility changes how people think about the future. Saving feels slower, planning feels uncertain, and the idea of getting ahead starts to feel less predictable. Even for people doing everything right, from the outside, modern life still looks stable. Cities are full, restaurants are busy, new cars fill the streets. Social media shows vacations, upgrades, and progress. At first glance, everything appears normal, but stability today often works differently than it used to. Many households maintain their lifestyle through careful balancing. Budgets are tighter, savings are thinner, unexpected expenses feel heavier. Life continues moving forward, but sometimes with far less margin for error. This creates something subtle but powerful: the illusion of stability. Everything looks comfortable from the outside, but underneath, the system has become more fragile. And when fragility increases, small disruptions can have larger consequences, which is why many middle-class families feel secure until something unexpected happens. Despite these pressures, conversations about financial struggle are surprisingly rare. Part of the reason is cultural. Money has always been a sensitive topic. People often avoid discussing salaries, debt, or financial stress. Another reason is perception. When everyone appears successful from the outside, admitting difficulty can feel uncomfortable. So many people stay silent. They continue working, continue paying bills, continue presenting a stable life to the world. And because everyone hides the pressure at the same time, it creates a strange illusion. It looks like everyone else is doing fine, even when many people are quietly dealing with similar challenges. This silence keeps the conversation from becoming visible. And when something stays invisible, it's easy to assume the problem doesn't exist. Financial pressure doesn't just affect bank accounts, it affects how people feel about their future. When stability becomes harder to maintain, uncertainty grows. People worry more about job security, more about unexpected expenses, more about long-term plans like retirement. Even small financial decisions can begin to carry emotional weight. Should I spend this? Should I save it? What if something goes wrong later? Over time, this constant calculation can become exhausting, and when millions of people feel this pressure at once, it slowly changes how an entire generation views money. Not as a tool for opportunity, but as something that must be managed carefully just to stay afloat. While many people focus on daily financial pressures, a quieter shift is happening beneath the surface of the economy. The structure of stability itself is changing. For much of the last century, the middle class formed the backbone of modern economies. They bought homes, started businesses, raised families, and spent money in ways that supported growth. But when that group begins to shrink, the balance of the system slowly changes. Societies become more divided. A smaller group accumulates more wealth. A larger group struggles to maintain stability, and the space in the middle becomes thinner. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, year by year, decision by decision, policy by policy, which is why many people feel that something in the economy has changed, even if they can't always explain exactly what it is. In a world where costs are rising and uncertainty is higher, financial stability looks different than it used to. It's no longer defined only by income. Two people can earn similar salaries, yet experience completely different levels of security, because stability today depends on more factors: savings, debt levels, housing costs, healthcare expenses, job flexibility, even location. The margin between income and expenses has become incredibly important. When that margin is healthy, people can adapt to unexpected challenges, but when that margin disappears, even a stable income can feel fragile, which means the definition of a middle-class life is slowly evolving. Not just about how much you earn, but about how much resilience your finances have. As the economic landscape changes, many people are beginning to rethink what success actually means. For decades, success was often measured through visible milestones: a large home, a new car, constant upgrades. But in a more uncertain financial environment, those signals can be misleading, because what looks impressive from the outside is not always the same as long-term stability. Some of the most financially secure people today live quieter lives. They prioritize savings, avoid unnecessary debt, build flexibility into their finances. From the outside, that lifestyle may appear ordinary, but beneath the surface, it creates something increasingly valuable: resilience, the ability to handle uncertainty without financial panic. And in a changing economy, that kind of stability becomes incredibly powerful. If life feels financially heavier than it used to, You're not imagining it. Many people quietly feel the same shift. The feeling that working hard doesn't stretch as far as it once did. That stability requires more effort, more planning, more caution, and sometimes more sacrifice. For decades, the middle class represented a sense of balance, not extreme wealth, not financial struggle, but a stable middle ground where effort translated into progress. Today, that balance is changing. Costs are rising faster, economic systems are evolving, and expectations built in another era no longer always match modern reality. Understanding this shift matters, because when people believe their struggles are purely personal, they often blame themselves. But sometimes, the environment itself has changed, and recognizing that difference can change how we think about money, work, and the future. The middle class hasn't disappeared, but it is changing. The path that once felt straightforward has become more complicated. Stability now requires different strategies, more awareness, more flexibility, and sometimes a new definition of what success actually looks like. Economies evolve, societies change, and each generation faces a different financial landscape. But one thing remains constant. People are still searching for the same basic goals: security, opportunity, and a life that feels stable. The question now isn't whether the middle class will survive. The question is how it will adapt to a world that is changing faster than ever before. And for millions of people today, that adaptation has already begun, quietly, gradually, one decision at a time.